Dusty, have you ever gone on a hunting trip?
Well, yeah.
You pack all your stuff. Let's say you're driving to New Hampshire. Let's say I'm driving to Ohio, and you're hunting for 4, 5, 6 days. What's the biggest challenge you usually have?
You're going to stop multiple times and get gas, and I worry about odor the whole way.
It's always in the back of your head. After talking to our friend Tim Gauthier, we realized that there's a better solution that is portable. And that solution is called the ScentLock Enforcer. This nifty little device, about the size of an iPhone, it produces ozone. Ozone is this naturally occurring O3 molecule that actually naturally removes odors, kills bacteria, binds to all kinds of odor particles in the air, and basically makes you scent-free instead of like a scent cover-up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
You can put this in your tote. It operates off of a USB and has an 8-hour battery life.
It's the personal ozone generator.
It is the personal ozone generator. If you want to check it out, go to ScentLockEnforcer.com. That's ScentLock Enforcer.com. Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, powered by ScentLock Enforcer, episode number 175. Neil Pendleton, a 1,490-day deer story. From the big woods of Maine to the urban areas of New Hampshire and the power of mock scrapes. Please support our sponsors as they make this show possible. Today's show is sponsored by the ScentLock Enforcer, the Eurohanger, and Morse's Sporting Goods. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hi, this is John Stallone with Interviews with the Masters podcast. And when I'm not editing my own podcast, I'm listening to the Big Buck Registry with Jay Scott.
This is Nick Pinizzotto, the CEO of the National Deer Alliance, and you're about to push play on my favorite show, the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast.
This is Sam Ubel from Whitetail Adrenaline, and I'm pressing play on one of my favorite podcasts, Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. My name is Jay, and we're fresh off Thanksgiving. Hopefully everything's going well, and hopefully you're back out in the field hunting deer. One of the biggest deer I ever killed was the day after Thanksgiving. But we wanted to say thank you for pushing play and joining us once again for another hour of deer hunting entertainment, bringing you world-class deer hunters as we dissect their habits and strategies so that you can too. When I say we, I mean me and my good friend and co-host from Ohio, Dusty Phillips. How are you, Dusty?
What's shaking, Jay?
Shaking bacon like the turkey's been shook.
You know, it's this show's pre-recorded, but I'm going to say that this time Saturday, I'm going to be still full as a tick.
Lots of leftovers in the household this time of year.
Oh, geez, I'll be full as a tick, Jay.
I actually love this time of year because there's plenty of food, there's plenty of stories to tell. You meet with your family and friends, and then you go deer hunting. You get some time off. You know, there's always that extra day. You got Thanksgiving off. Usually there's that Friday you have off, and then you have the weekend. And there's lots of activity in the woods for the deer. I mean, it's the perfect time of year as far as the rut's concerned. They're running around. It's cold out. The temperature's right. It's crisp and it's quiet. Just a good formula. And I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the rut, but it's some of the biggest opportunities to see a buck that you hadn't seen on your cameras all year.
I couldn't agree more. And then the 28th year Ohio deer gun kicks off, so I'm excited about that.
Now that is something to look forward to. So the 28th in Ohio, that's when that's going down.
Yeah, I mean, it's something to get excited about, but you can't always guarantee that the deer are going to cooperate in the form you want them to.
Right. They don't usually cooperate in the way you want to. I was talking to Tom Staples over at Morse's Sporting Goods today. I went and picked up a couple of the vests that I ordered. And, I wanted one of those, some of the orange vests that have the breakup black in it instead of having just solid orange.
Right.
What did I do? I called Morse's Sporting Goods because they have the specialty stuff. And I was able to go and feel the material on some of the other vests, and then I was able to pick out the exact pattern that I wanted. We had a few different to pick from, and I Tom called me today, said, your order's in. So I went over and picked it up. And in doing so, I was talking to Tom about his favorite time of year to hunt. And he just got back from Kansas. And we were discussing that, and his favorite time of the year is the same as mine. I don't know what yours is, Dusty. I've never actually asked you what your favorite time of year is to hunt. But we both concluded that it was the last week in October, and I extended it into the first week in November.
I couldn't agree more to that. No kidding. I was getting ready to say Halloween week and first week in November.
There you go. It's prime time. Yes, that is the pristine time for me. And it seems like most hunters kind of agree with that.
Cool, Jay. And hey, everybody, don't forget, a couple shows back we did a kind of a tree stand safety show. And if you're in the need of a safety harness, shoot Jay, myself, or Jim an email, Jay at bigbuckregistry.com, Dusty at bigbuckregistry.com, or Jim at bigbuckregistry.com. And we'll see if we can't get you a safety harness in the mail.
Yes.
And get you home after the hunt.
The safety harness program that we have wasn't intentional, really, but it just kind of, we were say, hey, we've got some spares, and if you'd like one, email us. My supply is down to 1. I've sent out 2. Jim had a few. He sent out 2. And you had some, but I think you found that some were expired, and we had to throw those away. So I replenished that with one of the ones that I had. And turns out, Dusty, that Neil Pendleton is ponying up. He's got 6 from that he's collected over the years, but a lot of us have our own harnesses. So if you need one, don't have one, never bought one, they're still using tree stands that never came with one, can't afford to buy one, let us know. Just like Dusty said, just email us, and we will get you on the list. As long as the supply lasts, we'll send it out. But if you have some to donate to the cause, let us know as well. Turns out Neil Pendleton is our guest on the show today.
Pretty cool.
It's pretty darn cool. So Neil, if you don't know Neil, let me just kind of set this up. Neil is a native of Maine, and he lives in New Hampshire now. And as this goes, we pay attention to those that send in an unusual large number of large bucks to our Facebook page. And this whole method of sending pictures into the Big Buck Registry, well, there's a method to the madness. The reason we do it is so we can track who's sending in lots of big bucks. And when we find that right person, we reach out for the interview because we know they're doing something special. We want to know how they do it so we can share it with you. And this is no exception. Neil sent in a really nice New Hampshire buck, and I think he tagged you in it, Dusty, because he wanted you to see it. And he said, see, there are big deer in New Hampshire. Right. And Neil is a really talented deer hunter. He sent in that one picture, and then when I was down in the Bedford, New Hampshire area, I was only not far from where he lives, and he had just shot a buck that morning. So I drove down to see it, and it was another nice buck. And it turns out today, Neil shot another buck with his bow. That was another nice buck. And now he's on his way to Maine to go deer hunt in Maine, where it looks like he's going to be doing some tracking because the snow is flying up there. The guy's intense.
Crazy, ain't it?
It's crazy. So we're going to get to learn how Neil does it and share all the techniques that he uses in New Hampshire to be successful. And believe me, and Dusty, you can attest to this. If you're shooting big deer routinely in New Hampshire, you're a very talented hunter.
That's no lie right there.
Yes, that is no lie. I mean, I chase these things all the time, and I'm not as talented as Neil. He's got something figured out, and I want to know what that is. And you're going to figure it out, too, if you're listen carefully to what Neil has to say. Before we get to Neil, let's turn to Jim Keller with the deer news.
The deer news this week is sponsored by the Euro Hanger. You don't have to spend big bucks to hang your big buck. Get yourself a Euro Hanger. Facebook.com/Eurohanger, EUROHANGER.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. And our first story this week, dead deer wakes up in trunk, surprises driver. This story was featured on the Milwaukee, Wisconsin Journal-Sentinel website and was written by Meg Jones. When a 59-year-old man in Adams County hit and killed a deer last week, he did what many Wisconsinites would do. He put in his trunk to take home for the delicious venison. But before he could return home, the deer woke up. Like the Monty Python sketch, I'm Not Dead Yet, the deer was not yet ready to go gently into the night. The motorist contacted the Adams County Sheriff's Department around 7:25 p.m. Thursday, and when the deputy arrived on the scene in Easton Township, his dashboard camera recorded the scene. The deputy talked to the motorist for about half a minute before the man gingerly opened his trunk. The deer moved and the motorist pulled it out of the trunk. A few seconds later, the deer bounded into the woods on shaky legs. Adams County Sheriff's Department posted the incident the next morning on its Facebook page with a photo of actors Chris Farley and David Spade in a car and a scene from the movie Tommy Boy with the deer in their back seat. Deer crashes into Georgia Applebee's, runs amok in the kitchen. This article was featured on the UPI.com website and was written by Ben Hooper. An Applebee's restaurant in Calhoun, Georgia was temporarily closed after a deer crashed through the window and ran amok in the eatery's kitchen. Joshua Baumgartner, a fry cook at the Applebee's restaurant on Highway 53 in Calhoun, said he and a co-worker were doing prep work Saturday morning when they heard a loud crash that sounded like glass breaking. The co-worker went in to investigate and discovered a male deer had broken through the window and was running toward the kitchen. Baumgartner told WAGA-TV he and his co-worker hid behind some garbage cans while the deer slipped and slid on the floor because it, quote, wasn't wearing its slip-resistant hoofs. The fry cook said he called 911, but the deer escaped through a back door before police arrived. A manager said there were no customers in the restaurant at the time of the incident, which left the deer without one of its antlers. We have been told that it's rutting season and that deer had possibly seen his reflection in our window and thought it was another buck and charged it, Baumgartner said. 6-point buck headbutts owner of Minnesota deer hide business. This story was originally posted on the Duluth News-Tribune website and was written by Tom Cerveni. A 6-point buck headbutted a rural Wilmer, Minnesota business owner, jumped over counters, and tipped over boxes before fleeing out of the door in which he arrived on Wednesday. The intruder caused havoc at Johnson Fur on South Highway 71, where workers were in the process of handling thousands of deer hides harvested in the last 2 weeks. It was something else, said business owner Scott Johnson, who took a set of 6-point antlers to his ribs and stomach. Johnson said he had a few tender ribs, but otherwise was okay. It all happened around 4 p.m. Wednesday. With warm weather, the front door to Johnson's fur business was wide open. Johnson said he was in his office when he heard a worker in a back room yelling his name. I thought he just needed something, Johnson said. He got up from his desk and stepped around the counter. Here it was, a big buck coming right at me, said Johnson, who's 67. After butting into Johnson, the deer dashed into the back room and jumped on the grading tables where hides are sorted and lots of paperwork were stacked. He proceeded to make mischief of it, Johnson said. He kind of tore the place apart before he got out of the door. At one point, it had even jumped atop a refrigerator. The Johnson's dog, a Jack Russell Terrier, barked at the intruder and nipped at its heels while Johnson and workers yelled at the buck invader. Johnson had been feeling nauseated that afternoon, and taking a set of antlers in the ribs and stomach didn't exactly help. He added, "It woke me up," he said, laughing. This is the deer rutting season, so Johnson said he can only speculate that the smells of the deer hides inside of the building may be what attracted the buck. If the buck wasn't lucky in love, the 6-pointer was at least lucky enough to escape Johnson Fur with his hide. After bounding out the door, the buck bolted right across Highway 71 and did not get hit by traffic. More deer on Staten Island must get vasectomies than expected. This story was originally reported on the New York Post website and was written by Mary Kay Ling. Mayor de Blasio's controversial deer vasectomy program is up against a far larger herd than the city expected. White Buffalo, the Connecticut company that is tranquilizing, operating on, and tagging the animals, has been paid just over $2 million this fall under a 3-year, $3.3 million contract. The experimental program, meant to rein in Staten Island's randy herd before it reproduces out of control, has sterilized 450 bucks in the island's southwest corner, according to the Parks Department. That means there are more than 2,250 deer in the area alone. The tally is 3 times the 763 deer counted island-wide in 2014, and rising. The city's vasectomy-only deer policy, a nationwide first, has been dismissed by wildlife experts as unfeasible. What's more, even sterilized bucks stay revved up throughout the mating season, which, some experts say, could continue for months if the does go into heat repeatedly, which will happen if they are not bred. As the amorous bucks chase females and fight each other, dangerous encounters with humans increase. 49 deer vehicle collisions have been reported on Staten Island so far this year, up from 31 last year, according to the Staten Island Advance. Of the 450 bucks sterilized, 13 have been killed by cars. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. And if you have ideas for any future topics or have questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller for the Deer News. Without further ado, here's Neil Pendleton.
Neil Pendleton, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. What's happening, brother?
Oh, just excited to talk some deer hunting.
All right. Well, you're in the right neck of the woods, I can tell you that. So, Neil, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm actually from Maine.
From Maine. Gotcha. That would explain the 207 area code on your phone.
That would do it.
That would do it. So you're from Maine, and you sent in a picture to the Big Buck Registry Facebook page, and one of my little behind the scenes secret tasks. The reason I do have that Facebook page is because I'm looking for interesting content for the show, and the interesting content are the hunters themselves. And when I start to notice a pattern, or if I start to notice that there's somebody sending in a buck from a particular area that's a little unusually large for that area, then I know I'm talking to somebody that really knows what they're doing, because that doesn't come easily. And you fit that mold exactly, Neil. So thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me. I've been a big follower of the Big Buck Registry's podcast. So I'm a huge fan, and it's one of those that it's helped improve my hunting, and so it's one of those I'm honored to be on the show.
Well, we're going to get along just fine then. All right, very good. Let's. So you're from Maine. Tell us about growing up a little bit. What was Maine like?
Well, for me, growing up in Maine, it was a great experience. So I grew up, just outside of a coastal town in Maine. I grew up in the town of Belfast, and that's where I guess my hunting roots, kind of started. Pretty much growing up, it was, great to, be with family. I had, a lot of my relatives were all there. Grandparents were a close part of my life, in addition to parents and aunts and uncles. So it's just, a real good family atmosphere growing up. And I had, the honor of being able to hunt with both my father and my grandfather. And they're the ones that really got me started in it at a young age.
Very nice. I'm glad you joined us, too, because we've been getting a lot of requests from people to explore more of the Northeast style of hunting. And I know you hunt other places than just the Northeast, but I'm excited to learn how you go about your deer hunting days in New Hampshire, because it is the Northeast, and there's a different style and there's a different way about it. And I don't know what kind of styles you employ typically, but we're going to learn about that. But I'm excited to talk to a fellow Northeast hunter to learn how you go about strategizing for the whitetails up here.
It's definitely different strategy and a whole different world of hunting, that's for sure. Hunting, whether it's the big woods or urban areas in New Hampshire where I hunt, it's one of those that's completely, different world than I actually just made my first trip, to the Midwest and hunted in Ohio. So that's, for me, the first time I ventured outside of hunting the Northeast. That's where I've really gotten all my experience and honed my skills. So I grew up hunting in Maine. I started at age 11 hunting, with my father and grandfather, as I said, and, learned a lot through them. And, whether it was sitting in stands with my father or doing, a couple of small drives, with pretty much my father and my grandfather and a couple of close friends. That's pretty much how I got introduced to hunting. And so it's one of those, there's not as many deer. The densities aren't quite there, especially in New Hampshire. I know a lot of the age structures aren't there. So it's, for me, trying to pursue big bucks, it's one of those that I kind of learned from my father, seeing him, pursue big bucks. Actually, the first morning I ever sat in a tree stand, guys, it was back when I was 11 years old. My father and I climbed into a wooden stand that he had built on his property. And that morning, I remember we're sitting there in the stand, and he kind of said, "Hey, Neil, there's a buck." And he looked over his right-hand shoulder, and I'm sitting to his left. And sure enough, I can hear it crunch, crunch, crunch coming down in through. And I see him lift up the 30-aught 6. And next thing I know, he squeezed one off. And that was within probably the first half an hour of sitting in the deer stand. My father had a big buck down on the ground. And for me, that kind of, I think right from there, being a part of, getting it out of the woods, bringing it back to the house, and being there with my father in a close moment like that, forever just, grew the affinity to deer hunting for me right there on the spot.
Nice. So is that your earliest recollection?
Actually, my earliest recollection is kind of funny. My earliest one, because in Maine at the time, you were able to start hunting when you were 10 years old. And so at the time, my father, like I guess probably any father, had hopes and aspirations of his son, falling in love with deer hunting and wanting to get out in the woods. And so when I was 10 years old, I didn't quite have it, the same passion for it at that age yet. So I remember we went for a walk out by my mother's house, and my father, I think he had a .410 and I had a BB gun, actually. So we went for a walk, and there was a gray squirrel that happened to run across, the path that we were on. And so I remember pulling up the BB gun to, try to shoot the gray squirrel. And next thing you know, my father, behind me, he's like, "Oh, Neil, shoot." And so I shot, the squirrel. Well, kind of looking back on it, I remember the BB gun sounded awfully loud that day. So it was one of those that, at the time, I didn't really think of it, but actually my father, I think, had probably been the one who actually, hit the squirrel, for me. But it was one of those that at the time I thought it was me, who got the squirrel. And so at that point in time, it was just, a great experience, being there. It was my first, accomplishment as a hunter with that squirrel. But I remember it was one of those that's the only time I've eaten squirrel in my life. But I remember, my father said, "Hey, if you're going to go and, take an animal's life, you have to, go and, eat what you kill." And so at the time, we actually cooked up squirrel that night, and something never done, since. But it was one of those, I remember spitting out multiple, birdshot pellets. So that's where I was assuming my father helped me out on that one. So that's actually my first, hunting memory.
No kidding. All right. So that's awesome. Yeah. Getting your first bite of lead is not the funnest thing in the world, but it's an experience we all have to go through. It's priceless. It's priceless when you're doing it with who you're doing it with. That's great. So what else was part of your foundation as a hunter growing up? Were there other people that influenced your life besides your dad, or whether you have uncles or friends that were into it?
It was one of those that was mostly growing up was my father and my grandfather. Both of them were who I spent most of my time hunting with. There was a couple other friends, my father's, that would, partake in the hunts. And pretty much it would be, we'd sit in the mornings and evenings, and then there would be that, kind of, gathering, in the middle of the day where, a few of us would get together and we'd go somewhere, and a couple of guys would be on stand. And then usually, my father, until I got old enough, with either my father and him or my father and a friend would walk through the woods. It's myself and usually my grandfather who would be on stand, and they would still hunt, through a piece of woods. And so that's what we would do in the middle of the day, and then get ready to sit in the evening. So pretty much, yeah, it was, my father and grandfather. I had friends, throughout high school who hunted, but it was one of those things that, even back then and even still today, I kind of try to do it, more so on my own. And, I always had friends, who were successful, just like myself, all through high school, and we'd share the experiences and stories, but I didn't really hunt with a lot of other people, than my family.
Okay. Gotcha. How old were you when you first went hunting outside of your family, like without your dad, without your grandfather?
That would probably be, on my own, growing up, it was one of those that, you're allowed to, at, 16 years old, be able to, take a hunter safety course before then. And that way you can start venturing off, on your own. And so that was really the first year, that I had started, on my own hunting. And it was one of those that I always had the success with my father's, scouting, and he'd put up stands. And so I'd sat in spots, with him up to that point. So I knew that now it's time for me to venture out on my own. I wanted to try to, get some of my own success and, try to learn as much as I could and finally experience the woods. And my father, was one of those that he had trusted me at the time, to be able to, venture off, on my own and, not have to, be, under his influence at all. And so then pretty much when I started hunting with some other friends and, buddies was in college, at that point in time where, I'd go out, with friends, and we'd get together and scout, certain areas and, hang stands and, give each other advice. But for the most part, something for me with hunting, has really been, because I'm more of a stand, hunter, is usually been a lot of times solo.
What was it like when you first broke away? It's like you're excited, but at the same time, your dad is your hunting buddy.
Yeah. And
how'd you feel?
It was one of those. I was very fortunate to have, a great hunter in my father, to learn from. But it was one of those too that I always felt like in some ways I was, in his shadow, because it was one of those that, I would sit in his stands or stands that he had hung. And so most of the deer that I had gotten and most of the bucks, that I've been fortunate enough to take had all been a result of, his work, his hanging stand. So it was one of those that I wanted to prove, I guess, that I could, do it on my own and, find my own spots, hang my own stands. And put the pieces of the puzzle together myself. So it was one of those that, those first, few years, I remember that, there was one stand, even though he had set it up, I was probably 16 or 17 at the time. It was one that, we kind of abandoned, down by this river, and it was, a long walk in, but I said, hey, I think, later in the season, I think that's the spot to be. And I remember, going down in there and, getting set up and had a nice 8-point buck, come charging in, half an hour before dark to a little, bleak can call. And so, I mean, that was one of those that I felt like, hey, I kind of did that on my own. I picked the time, the spot to go. And so there's a lot of great memories there, but, a lot of them, throughout until I probably got to college and started hunting in New Hampshire. Actually, that's, for the most part when I really started, going on my own.
Gotcha. Now, hunting Maine, hunting New Hampshire, it's both Northeast territories. What do you think that there's a difference between hunting Maine, knowing what you know now, and hunting New Hampshire?
I would say that there definitely is a difference, especially with the areas that I typically now hunt in Maine. My father, he has a cabin up in, I'll call it northern Maine to me, but it's a lot of people from Maine would probably call it more of a central / getting into the down east type area near where Grand Lake Stream is. It's about an hour north of Bangor, and you head east from that on the kind of borders of Washington County and Penobscot County lines. And so that's more, big wood style hunting where you're, going on to paper company land and you have thousands of acres, to now, just go and explore and roam. And, and the deer are so spread out in pockets that some of their ranges up there can be, 7-8 miles, some of the loops that they'll do. So it's definitely a lot different hunting because the deer will roam a lot.
So what kinds of styles of hunting do you employ in the Northeast? Obviously, stand hunting is probably a preferred method in Ohio and down south. What styles do you use in New Hampshire and Maine?
It's pretty much been stand hunting for myself. I try to find, good locations and, first thing in the morning and evening. That's where I'll set up, in a stand. Especially, when I'm bow hunting, that's, all I'll do. But when I do hunt, up in Maine and do rifle hunting, and even in New Hampshire, I will, walk around and do a lot of still hunting in the day. And so for when I go up to Maine, I mean, a typical day up there would be, wake up hours early, eat breakfast, get all the gear ready, hop in the truck and drive somewhere to where I'll go hunt, get over there, well before it gets daylight, and then try to get into a stand, sit the first 3-4 hours of the day, get down, go back out to the truck, grab something to eat, and then, drive to a different location because there's, the vast amounts of woods to be able to explore and just find a spot that I want to, just go in for the day and go for a long walk and explore and still hunt and, see new ground or scout new areas that I think, have great potential, and then get ready to head back for the evening sit. So oftentimes when we're up at camp, I mean, we don't really even see camp at all, during the daytime. It'll just be, at night, we're pretty much coming back just to have a roof over our head because we spend all of our time in the woods.
Gotcha. All right. That sounds familiar, doesn't it, Dusty?
Oh yeah, sure does.
kind of like every time we get together, it's you just spend the entire time in the woods, and you come back after dark because you stay till the last light, and then you go grab a bite to eat and a beer maybe, and then you crash, and you do it all over the next day. That's deer camp.
Yeah. That's definitely what it is. And so that's where, comparing it to New Hampshire, where I hunt, because in New Hampshire, it's one of those that I do live in southern New Hampshire, so it's more of an urbanized area. So it's one of those that you don't have quite the woods to explore, and, the deer don't travel as far the same tracks. So it's a lot more, trying to use a lot of strategy and really trying to, time it right and, look at, where the deer are and look at the influence of hunting pressure, because it's one of those that I think one of the big differences I know for me recently going to Ohio for the first time was looking at, the different laws and rules that, I know that they've been discussed a little bit on the podcast, but for those people who haven't necessarily hunted New England, it's one of those that if, land, is privately owned, unless if it's not posted, it's as, I guess, common access that anyone has the ability to go and hunt it and use it, for hunting and, to explore. So that's one of those that there's a lot of open land that's available. So it's pretty much all considered public for the most part. And I think that's one of those that between hunting pressure in New Hampshire, because there is so many other influences, so many other people that could go into a spot that you've scouted and put time, into, it's one of those that, that can completely change, on a dime. All the, summer research you've done using trail cameras and scouting to try to locate, where you want to hunt.
Gotcha. All right. So now this brings up an interesting topic because you're from Maine and it sounds like you're used to hunting the big woods of Maine. And is that kind of the style that you grew up on in Maine?
Yeah, I mean, I won't call it necessarily, huge woods where I grew up on. That was probably once I got, into college where I really started hunting the big woods. But growing up, even though it was, more woods, you could roam a lot farther. There wasn't as many, houses. It was one of those, I still consider it somewhat, urbanized. But it was, one of those that still, big tracts of land that you could, go, several miles before hitting another road in some spots.
Okay. And then come to southern New Hampshire. And
that's a big difference.
Right? That's a big difference. I mean, that's where sounds like you're hunting now. That's where you live. Southern New Hampshire is much more grown up than even central New Hampshire, and definitely more than northern New Hampshire. There's commerce. Most of the cities are found along the southern border of New Hampshire, and I would say that southern New Hampshire, in a sense, looks a lot like northern Massachusetts when it's all said and done. So, and you have houses that have been built around this commerce area. Now, I don't know exactly where you're at, but it sounds like you got to pick your spots. You don't have that many to pick from.
And that was one of the weirdest things for me, Jay, when I first got started, is that, one, I'm used to big woods. And so the first thing I do when I try to, hey, I'm living in this new area, and where am I going to go? And when I pull up a map, where am I going to start focusing my efforts? And it was looking at, on, satellite images, it was where are the biggest pieces of woods where there isn't roads between, there isn't houses. And that's where I initially focused my efforts, was trying to find the biggest tracts of land, which I quickly then learned isn't always the best place to focus your efforts for hunting, because the deer can be spread out, they can be sporadic. There's usually also a lot of other hunting pressure in some of those areas, and the deer will naturally gravitate towards the safer areas, which are near houses. And so that's where it was starting to look at, all these different terrain features of funnels and pinch points. And also when you look and study maps, trying to figure out, well, where will other hunters may not be? Where is there not a parking lot? Where is there not a spot you can pull off on the road? And so it's trying to put all those pieces of the puzzle together to first figure out, what's going to lead to, a successful area without the influence of many others potentially, kind of ruining your hunt. And so when I first started hunting down here, I remember, tons of times I'd be, up in a stand, and here I am always in early, whether it's a half an hour before first light, and get settled in and relaxed. And, numerous times I'd see a headlamp come bopping through, and it's almost daylight, or actually daylight now, and here comes a headlamp, walking on through of another hunter.
Right. And
so there's definitely it's a whole different ballgame.
Definitely a different ballgame. And how many hours did you put into scoping out the area on maps, for example?
It's one of those that, I constantly, looking at maps, and it's one of those that, not only in the off season, but pretty much when I'm sitting, in a deer stand, during hunting season, it's one of those I'm always just, looking at my phone, sitting there trying to study and find, different spots to go to, different areas to scout, whether it's during the season, whether it's in the off season, because it's one of those that, for me, especially the last probably 5 years, deer hunting has taken on such an obsession, I think, not only my life, but many, hunters' lives, where it becomes, a year-round, 365-day, endeavor. So it's one of those that, I spend so much time looking at the maps and trying to find different terrain features and different pinch points, and looking at, how to access these areas, and, trying to look for whether it's, food sources or bedding areas. And so that's what I think really goes into it, is trying to find some of these, places on maps, and then I'll mark them down, whether it's, that same year or in future years that I have aspirations to go and check out, and then actually walk through it and see what the woods look like.
Gotcha. How many different hunting spots did you identify to the point where you'll maybe rotate through these spots? How many do you generally hunt overall?
Well, now that I've been living here, for longer in the area where I currently live, it's one of those that I have, more and more spots, that I've learned over the years, which I think, really helps being able to hunt within somewhat of a proximity to where you live, because you can, put that time, effort, and resources. And, especially for me, trying to, target, large mature bucks, the use of trail cameras has been a huge benefit, because it's one of those that, I've heard time and time again, is that you can't obviously, kill a big buck if the big buck doesn't exist where you're hunting. And for
Very
me,
true.
it's one of those that's it's been trying to locate, where there is, larger bucks. And so whether it's through first, trying to find, previous years, rubs, whether it's going in and trying to find tracks, which I know, especially the use of trail cameras nowadays, it's one that I've found that's, probably the best starting point is, 9 times out of 10, a huge track means, not only a huge buck, but something, with a good rack. And so it's that level of maturity that, that I'd want to go after. So that's where then once I've found the sign, it's then a matter of, trying to deploy trail cameras to hopefully catch a glimpse, of that buck. Because normally where there's one buck, there's also oftentimes other good bucks in that area.
Gotcha. How many cameras do you put in the woods?
Well, I've grown quite a large array of trail cameras over the years to where I started, using them, probably around, 2008, 2009 is when, probably started getting some of my first trail cameras. And so now I've pretty much lost count. It's probably upwards of, I'd say 30 trail cameras probably about now is what I have and what I run.
Gotcha. All right. Well, speaking of tools and tricks that we use, I'm going to turn the mic over to Dusty. I'm going to have him go through your gear check, kind of find out what it is that you think are what's important to you and what's not. I'm going to let Dusty kind of run that segment.
Neil, do you carry a backpack into the woods?
I definitely do, Dusty.
Well, any particular brand?
Well, just this year, I've started using a Badlands backpack is the brand that I've now started using. Previous years, it was, just, whether it was a Walmart brand backpack, but, this year, as I guess I've gone over the years, I've tried to get better and better quality things. And so that's where knowing how important gear is, I went, this year and decided on getting a Badlands backpack.
Gotcha. Any particular reason why you went with Badlands?
Well, one, I had some friends who would use Badlands and had, great things to say about it. But then, the more I'd researched it and looked at, the different Badlands backpacks, it was one that I just saw the durability, the quality is there, and all the features and the design is really meant for, hunters, and especially the backpack that I am using in particular for tree stand hunter.
Awesome. So let's take and pull the zipper back and tell us what's inside that backpack.
All right, Dusty. Well, I'm actually taking my backpack out of my little hunting tote that I have here in front of me. Nice. So I'm actually looking at it now. So I'm taking my Badlands. It's the tree stand backpack out. So one of the first things that I have actually on the outside is I have some of the accessory hooks that I use, to hang, whether it's a pair of binoculars on or before I put in a bow hanger. I have some of the, if you're familiar with the Hawk bow hangers, I like the Hawk accessory hangers. They're rubberized hangers that have a little carabiner clip. So that way I can clip them to outer loops on the Badlands backpack. And then they also have where the threads of the screw-in part are, there's a little plastic cap you can screw that back into, so that way it's not going to be poking around, and you can just, hang it off the backpack. If you need to, you can unscrew it to then put into the tree. For the 2016 season, I ended up, getting an ozone unit. So I have that. I have some other accessory hangers. I'm unzipping a pouch with a Scott release is what I use. It's the Wildcat release. It's a smaller release because I like that. So that way I can, get a better anchor point, I feel. Then moving further inside the backpack, so there's a lot of compartments and pockets in this. I have a backup release, one of those that I probably overpack with a lot of my stuff. I always want to make sure that I'm well prepared when I get in the stand. So I have a backup release. I have a small flashlight. There is a SD card reader. So that way, usually I'll bring a digital camera, but I have a little SD card reader that's, plastic coated, that's waterproof, that if I ever want to upload pictures to my phone while I'm out in the woods, I can do that. Then I have a plastic Ziploc sandwich bag with my hunting license. Then from there I have flagging tape, so in case I need to start marking a blood trail. I have inside my rangefinder that's attached to a binocular harness, because one thing that I found very important is that if I'm going to be using a rangefinder, I don't want to have to be fumbling and bumbling trying to figure out what pocket it's in or to put it back in a pocket. So I started using last year a binocular harness to attach my rangefinder to, so that way it's always right on my chest, and if I need to use it, I don't have to put it away. It just goes right back to your chest. I have a grunt tube, a headlamp, a pair of binoculars. I have, let me see what else.
You got like a cart you're hauling this thing in on? My goodness, you got more stuff in that backpack than I got my whole hunting arsenal.
Yeah, I do have, quite a few things, so I always like to be prepared. And lastly, I think I have my safety strap, because a lot of times I'll do, portable, stand setups with whether it's, a hang-on tree stand or a climbing tree stand. So I have a strap that goes around the tree to be able to clip into.
Very cool. Wow, that's a full backpack.
It definitely is. And so sometimes if I'm not planning on, carrying everything into the woods, I'll use like a fanny pack type style, duffel bag, like backpack. So that way I can just throw minimal accessories in there to be able to have what I need.
Very cool. So we got into your backpack. Let's talk a little bit about what kind of camouflage are you wearing?
So for camouflage, I use different types of camouflage. Being from Maine, a big company that I really like to try to use as much of their products as I possibly can is LL Bean stuff. Currently, right now, actually, the next couple of days it's going to be raining. I have a LL Bean. It's like a Gore-Tex, hunting pants and hunting jacket set up. For other camos, I have this year I got some Sitka Gear camo, which I really like, the quality of that and some of the patterns on some of the Sitka Gear camo. I have other Field and Stream camo, different real tree patterns. So I'm not really necessarily at this point loyal to one brand as much as, I love to use the LL Bean stuff. I just, love the quality and their customer service policy as well, that if you have problems with it, being, as hard a user of, the stuff that I am, it's one of those that if something goes wrong with it, I know that, they stand by their products, which is something that I feel is really important. Gotcha.
Any particular pattern on that?
On that one, it's some version of Real Tree on that particular LL Bean stuff.
Gotcha. Any particular boots you like to wear?
So there's actually, I'd say, probably 3 or 4 different main types of boots. The early season, I'll use like a small ankle style, like slip-on rubber boot. So that way I'm still, implementing, the as less than as possible, I guess, by wearing, small, like ankle size, like rubber slip-on boot. Then I use the Lacrosse Grange rubber boots as it gets a little further along the season. They're also going into area where there's, any type of, swamp or any type of water at all. Then I use LL Bean boots, especially when I go up in Maine. I'll use their Bean hunting style boots. I like the fact that on the bottom, the soles, they're not really, heavy with, I guess, any of my boots that I wear typically. I want to be able to feel the ground when I walk. I don't like to have, some, big stiff tread that's there that I can't feel when I'm walking on. And then lastly, I'll use like the muck boots, like the Arctic Sports, for when it gets really cold and I'm up in Maine when it gets down to, pushing 0 and I'm going to be sitting for 4 hours and the toes are going to get numb. I like to have, something, a good substantial warm boot.
Very good. What kind of bow are you shooting?
Currently right now, I actually have 2 bows that I'm using. I use an Elite bow. Right now I'm shooting the Impulse 34, as well as a bow that Morse's Sporting Goods and Randy Gagne has actually set up for me. I'm using the Prime Rise is also another bow that I'm using this year. So, of course, I know you guys know Randy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Randy's a great fella and really enjoy talking with Randy.
Yeah, I can see Randy leave for work every day around 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock as I look out my office window at my house.
Yeah, so I know it's, he's, a great archery, tech, and so it was actually, this year was the first time, I got a chance to meet Randy, and he did a, fantastic job setting up, my bow for me, and so it was one of those that, it's an amazing bow, and so, thanks to Randy and the great job he did, setting it up. I've been enjoying shooting it all summer and using it this season.
Nice.
Very cool. What kind of arrows are you shooting?
Currently right now, I'm using Gold Tip Kinetic Chaos. Because I decided this year, after trying to learn as much as I can, from hearing, other people you've had, on your podcast, or doing as much research as possible, to try to go with a heavier arrow setup to make sure that I have more penetration. So that's where the Gold Tip Kinetic Chaos offers that heavier arrow.
Very good. Any particular broadhead that you purchased to tip it with?
Right now, I'm currently, even though I have not experienced the results of them yet, this year I decided to go with a fixed blade broadhead. So I'm shooting the G5 Striker right now. In previous seasons, I've always had great luck using the Grim Reaper. I believe it's the Razor tip. And I've gone with both the 2-inch whitetail edition as well as the 1 3/8 edition as well. So that's more of a mechanical broadhead.
Very cool. Very cool. Let's get into tree stands. What's your favorite? A hang on, ladder, climber, or a ground blind?
I haven't used the ground blind much. I do have one. For me, my favorite has to be probably, I would say, the one that gets used the most right now would be my lone wolf hand climber. That's really for me, being able to go into multiple areas, being able to, to climb trees and, to sit a variety of different spots. That's probably, my favorite. I use some of the summit tree stands if I want to, be able to lounge out and be comfortable, especially if I'm gun hunting up in Maine, to have that bar to be able to, lean forward on and be a little bit steadier holding a gun is a big feature. But I have just this season started to more of like the running gun type hang-on setups, especially when I was down in Ohio, to have climbing sticks and a hang-on tree stand that I've tried to get proficient at being able to in a time-efficient manner set the sticks up, hang up, put the hang on the tree, which lone wolf stuff really helps with, to be able to have that ease, that quiet ability. And that was another, I guess, getting back to the backpack, key feature of that Badlands backpack is that I can go in with all the gear that I carry. I can have a hang on my back. I can have the backpack clipped into the stand, and I can have the climbing sticks underneath that backpack because it has straps. And so that way I can go in with all the gear that I need. I can get set up, and then take it all down and take it all out with me, that same evening.
Very cool. Very cool. Jay, you want to get into going on a memorable hunt?
Absolutely. Now that we've kind of set the stage of how you like to hunt, what you hunt with, now it's time to kind of put that to the test and take us on a hunt with you and really get down to the details of how this entire hunt unfolded. And I believe in our pre-show chat, I believe you had planned on telling us the story about the buck that you sent in to the Big Buck Registry Facebook page, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that particular buck that I sent in, that is a buck that for me, they always, use the saying, hunt of a lifetime, buck of a lifetime. For me, truly, I had the honor of being able to hunt a magnificent, giant whitetail buck for 1,490 days. So it's spanned 5 seasons. Yes. So for me, that is a story that I would like to share.
That's awesome. All right. So we're going to take 1,000, how many?
490 days. Yes.
1,490 days and condense it into the next 25 minutes or so.
Wow.
And find out how this whole thing unfolded. This might be the most epic tale we've ever had on the show, other than Jared Scheffler, probably. But to have that much condensed down and that much time that went into one particular deer, this is going to be amazing. I'm pumped to hear this story. All right, so where are we going specifically?
Well, it's hard to even pick where to start, I guess. But it's one of those, I think probably the first place to start is the first evidence that I had of a giant whitetail existing in southern New Hampshire.
Got it.
So in the summer of 2011, I had gone and put out some trail cameras in an area that I believed to be a potentially good bedding area for deer. And so I'd found, a nice thicket, and so I put out some cameras, and that summer I had pictures of just does and fawns. So then when opening weekend rolled around here in New Hampshire, it's September 15th. And so I'd been down there that prior week and checked the cameras and still just does and fawns. So I decided at that time to hunt somewhere else opening weekend, which was the decision for years that I really regretted. Because on opening day, which was a Thursday in 2011, I had pictures of this giant buck that came by opening morning, opening evening, and throughout the next Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, was there frequenting this area during daylight. And so that particular Sunday, I had a friend of mine who had actually gotten a nice buck, and we had another friend that came down. So, of course, we all like swapping deer stories. So we're standing around, looking at the buck, trading stories, and my intentions were all day just to go check that trail camera. I got to get down in there and see if anything, had shown up yet. So, of course, I'm sitting there, I'm running late. I hop in the truck, and I'm driving over there, still with the intentions to check that camera. And I'm looking at the clock, and I'm thinking, well, do I really have time to walk in there and check that camera? No, there hasn't been anything all summer. I got to get to my other spot and hunt that. So I didn't check in on Sunday. And then Monday during lunch break, I'm fortunate, to have a job that I work at that allows me flexibility to, sometimes make my own schedule. And so I was able to take, a longer lunch break that day to go check the trail camera. So I walked down on the spot, and I'm going through pictures, just, scrolling through my digital camera right there at the site of the trail camera. And I couldn't believe what I saw. All of a sudden, I just see this giant buck. I mean, daytime picture, one of the most beautiful pictures I have ever seen. Broadside to where this giant rack that went up. And I mean, at the time, I couldn't even tell you, how many points it had. It hadn't really broken into a non-typical rack. It was still very typical. But my jaw just hit the ground. I was weak at the knees and just starting to shake. So I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And then I started scrolling through the pictures to see how much daylight activity there was. Really got me excited. So the first person I wanted to call, of course, was my father. And so at that time, I'm like, crap, I can't go and sit here tonight and hunt. I got to go back to work. And I was kicking myself at the time in the butt because I'm like, well, if I had been here and checked that camera like I intended yesterday, he came by about a half an hour, 45 minutes before, it got dark out that Sunday, the day before. And so, of course, I always look back to, well, this story may not exist if I had checked that camera that Sunday. I mean, I may have been fortunate enough if, the winds were correct and everything to be able to actually have a chance at, taking an animal back in 2011, where then at that point in time, I think that's really the beginnings of the story, is first getting picture evidence, of this giant buck. And that's really, I think, where the tale began.
All right. Well, that's okay. So that's a heck of a way to start. So you've got it. You know it exists, basically.
Yep.
That's all you know, and you have an idea where it might be hanging out. All right. So what happens next?
So next, I went and admittedly probably made some mistakes at that point in time, because as opposed to looking at things like wind, looking at things like weather, and really trying to come up with a better strategy, I just knew that it was time to hang a stand and time to start hunting. And it was one of those that I kind of let, the pictures, I think, really get the best of me. And so that was a spot that I really didn't look at the bigger picture, I think. I kind of got tunnel vision and really focused on, sitting that stand as much as possible whenever I could, trying to get a chance to, to get that buck in front of me. And it was an area where, since it was near a bedding area, it was really thick. And so I didn't have, much of an opening to be able to see around the woods. I could hear stuff, walking by, and it was one of those that I started implementing a mock scrape at that point in time to try to, get more pictures, which, I did throughout that season of that buck and another, pretty good caliber buck as well. And so it was, throughout that season, I just, essentially sat, had a long, a lot of, long sits in the tree stand, just hoping, for the chance for him to step out, and seeing, a lot of does, a lot of fawns, waiting for my opportunity, which never came in 2011. I did have a chance at that other buck, that season, to where that was, a pretty intense story itself. But so it was one of those that the plan A, I guess, that year didn't end up happening, but there was a great consolation prize. So it was, a positive end to 2011, but there was going to be another year leading into 2012 with that buck still out there.
Gotcha. All right. So how many years has transpired so far?
So this is just the first season.
So
we've gone through 2011. I pretty much, I'd say, kind of hunted a stand, and really was just had tunnel vision in on, hey, this is where I got pictures and this is where I need to hunt. I know he's coming through, and tried to sit, primarily that location as much as possible.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So let's continue with the story.
So then in 2012, that's when I, realized at that point I needed to try to, expand, the search and try to figure out, more areas of where this deer, could be, and, really find out more about, where he was living and what he was doing. So that's where, starting in 2012, I had trail cameras out, and I got his pictures in May. It was in the middle or early May when I first got pictures of a buck that I knew it had to be him. I mean, you're talking huge baseball bat-sized beams, sticking out. And so I said, great, I know he exists. And at that point in time, continued to run cameras, in the area the whole rest of the summer. Never got another picture of him again. So opening weekend rolls around. As much as I would love to sit, in an area where I had evidence that he existed, I just couldn't do it. So I hunted somewhere else. And I wasn't going to wait the full 3 or 4 days this time to go check the camera. So I think it was the following day I went back in to check a camera in that area, and I couldn't believe it. For the second year in a row, on opening day, this buck walked by during daylight where I should have been sitting. I think in one of the pictures you can almost see the tree in the background, where I should have been in that morning with him coming by 10 minutes after light.
No kidding.
Yep.
It's like they have a sixth sense. I swear to God.
They definitely do. So throughout, the 2012 season, I continued to learn more about them, trying to expand, the areas, where I hunted them, trying to figure out and learn more. And then the only other I think real pictures that I got of him, I got some throughout the season. It was actually late season. I had filled both my archery tags at that point in time, with taking, some other nice bucks. And so then when it came down to the end of the season with a week left of archery, because once our gun season ends in New Hampshire, there's that week extra that archery goes. And so, of course, like as you said, he had a sixth sense for this. He knew, I think, I was tagged out. He knew that at this point in time, all I had left, was a doe tag in my pocket. So, of course, he started showing back up, during daylight. And I was tempted, of course, to tell my father, get your butt down here. We got to go and, hunt this deer. But I was probably a little selfish, at that point in time as well, and saying, well, he'll be there next year. So then it moves into 2013, where I had done, more of the same, trying to expand, the area of where I was hunting him. And this is where not only did I start to realize that I knew about him, but how actually widely known this buck was by many other people. There was one day in a local parking lot, I actually bumped into a trapper that was there. And he was talking about, seeing this, this giant buck, because he ran a trap line in that area. And so he had said, hey, I've seen, this buck over in this area. So I started checking a little bit more over there, which was a decent, amount distance away, probably almost a mile and a half away from where, the core area where I knew him to be. I started finding some nice rub lines, but I knew that particular area was really pressured with other hunter presence. So I didn't think there would be much daylight activity of this buck, over in that area. But I did, continue to scout it. And I actually bumped into another hunter that day, small world, that has a cabin up in the same area in Maine that my father does.
Gotcha.
And of course we got talking about hunting and, him talking about, how hard it is to hunt in that particular area of Maine. And he started talking about this giant buck that was out there. And as he goes and starts telling it, my heart's sinking. So I'm like, wow, he's opening up to me, and I've known him for less than 2 minutes. And he's just telling stories of this giant buck. And I'm like, how many other, hundreds of people has he told this to that know about him? And the really cool thing was that he told me that he had his shed at his house. So when I learned he had gotten his sheds from 2012, he found one in his backyard. Really? I, of course, was excited, to finally put my hands, on the bone, from this buck. So after seeing, his truck in the parking lot later on that, I think it was that summer, I had stopped in, to chat with him and introduce myself a little more, and finally got to see, the antler, one half of the antlers, from this buck that I'd pursued, so hard now. And that was in 2013.
Gotcha. All right. So we're a couple of years into this endeavor, and
yep. So this would be three seasons into it now.
Okay. And there are people that know about this buck at this point, and other people are after him.
Yes, there is a lot of other people that know about him, and a lot of other people that are after him, and pretty much all the area around there is all open to, hunting. There isn't any, for the most part, any posted areas. So, any other hunters can go into any of these spots, and so the word is spread, that there is a big buck that's out there, and so there are other people who've gotten pictures of him, and so it was one of those that, at this point in time, I was really beginning to learn that, wow, like, he's not just my, secret. It's, everyone else, knows about him.
Right.
So that's where, and then also, in 2013 is where I had, my first encounter, with that deer as well.
Right.
Which that in itself was a pretty exciting experience. The evening that I saw and laid eyes on him for the first time.
So you've got the deer to hunt. And you're trying to outwit all the keen senses of the whitetail. You're also trying to outwit every hunter in the area that's after this monster. And
that is correct.
What's going through your head at that point? How are you thinking that I've got a 1 in something chance to get this done, or are you thinking like probably it's not going to happen?
No, I've always been an optimistic person, so I was especially optimistic knowing that, I'm very persistent, I'm very dedicated, and I would say that I've put in, probably more time than, I know I put in a lot of time than the majority of hunters that are out there. And so I think that's where, for my first few seasons, in this hunt, it was one of those that I think that kind of worked against me, in some ways, that I'd hunted, so hard and put in so much time and so much effort that I'd thought that, that's how in many ways I grew up hunting, is that, you got to be in the stand to be able to, to get a deer. And so that's when I think, for me, that's where the true, lessons I started to learn, where, this deer started to teach me so much more that I had to step my game up and really evolve myself as, a bigger buck hunter, to say, well, you can't just always hunt harder. You got to start hunting smarter at some point in time. And that's really then, where I started to, to try to, learn as much as I could, and trying to, whether it was, listening, to podcasts, reading books, doing research online, reading as many articles as possible, just talking to other people. I wanted to now, try to figure out, as much information as I could to even further myself as what I felt was, a really accomplished hunter. But I wanted to make sure that I could try to, stack all the odds in my favor, knowing that there was other people that were after this buck as well.
Gotcha. All right. So how did you start strategizing? I mean, you said you're learning things, but what did you start? Looking back now, you must have realized that some of those things that you learned must have clicked, or maybe they didn't. What types of things do you think helped you?
Well, I really had to look at, looking at an urbanized area. Well, how is this buck, and what is he doing, and why is he doing it, and why am I getting pictures? Where is he coming? Where is he going from? Which, it's one thing to get a picture, but now I'm starting to look at, well, what direction, is he coming from? Why would he have been coming from that direction? It's like, was it a bedding area? Was it a food source? What time of day was it? Was it evening? Was it morning? And so those pieces of the puzzle is what I really started, to go and look at, and then look at the maps, look at the terrain features, look at where houses were, and look at, why particularly on certain days would he have been moving through there, to try to, now really expand, I guess, the search for this deer's entire range, to try to figure out, with all the pieces of the puzzle, how I could, better stack those odds in my favor.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So where'd you go next with this information?
So then at this point in time, it was one of those that that's where, in 2013 was where, I had my first sighting, of the buck, because it was one of those that, some of the other things that I did was learning that when you're hunting, in urban areas, that, you can't just be, tromping through the woods, laying down in a bunch of scent. You can't be, jumping the deer. And so it's one of those that I would, start, going in really early, or I would sit, later to make sure the woods had calmed down and almost turned over, is kind of a term that I've used before, to make sure that, if with one of the areas where I was hunting, the first encounter I had, there was usually every night some does that would come by my stand, and they would be headed from a bedding area to a food source. And so one particular evening, as I sat, the does had gone by. It was about 20 minutes after it got dark, and I was, anxious to get down and get back to my truck. And I remember hearing some light footsteps coming in and thinking, I don't know if it's just a trailing fawn or what it is. And then sure enough, here comes this giant buck, 25, 30 yards away in the moonlight, walking behind my stand. And just watching him for the first time and seeing him and catching a glimpse was just something that was magnificent. And seeing the way he moved, just with every step, being thought out and methodical. And I kind of compared it to like an analogy of like in a movie, sometimes there's those action heroes who they don't seem to dodge the bullets. It's almost like the bullets are dodging the action hero. And that's the way he moved, that night when I saw him for the first time, that he just, every step was, precision focused. And that I think he knew, almost that my presence was there, but knew that it was after dark and there was, nothing that could be done about it. So that, especially seeing him just, I think really, lit even more of a fire. And so that's where then, leading into 2014, that's when I realized I had to, start using more cameras and really try to focus on, doing a lot more summer scouting and try to, learn as much as I possibly could.
Did you feel at that point, after seeing this buck, I don't know if he was silhouetted in the moonlight or not, but it's the feel I get. I don't know if that's what really happened or not. But did you feel like you're saying to yourself, I'm getting warmer, I'm getting closer, I just got to put together the rest of this puzzle?
Yeah, and that's where, leading into 2014, I felt confident that, once pressure started in the woods, that I knew where this buck, was probably going to end up. I knew where he was probably, going to head to try to avoid, that hunting pressure, which, typically when youth weekend comes around, and then once, muzzleloader season starts after that, he would, head for, thicker cover to try to get away. And so I knew pretty much where he was headed. And so I kind of had it down to 3 phases, typically where his summer range was, where his early fall range, and I kind of considered them one and the same, and then where he would head, during the heart of the season to try to, get away from other people. And then come late season, he would then pretty much disappear. And I never, for the most part, really figured out, after that where he would go. Even when we got snow on the ground, walking around, trying to find, his tracks somewhere, he just seemed to completely, disappear, whether it was, hiding in between, a cul-de-sac of houses somewhere where, nobody would go and nobody would bump him, and just, laying low. I never really figured that out, but I felt confident that I knew where he would go, during a certain time of the year, during a few select weeks. And so that's where, going into 2014, I really sat back and said, okay, I don't need to hunt that area. I don't need to go there, because I know when he's going to show up, and I'll have trail cameras that I can check every once in a while to finally figure out once he's arrived. And so that's pretty much exactly what happened. It was just right on script, where in 2014, he had gone and showed up exactly where I wanted him to be at exactly the time I expected him to. And that was when I actually, saw him about 100 yards away. I'd gotten down out of my stand one morning, and I was, sitting near this bedding area, and I ended up stepping on like a little twig when I got down out of my stand, and I ended up hearing some movement out in the bush. And so I kind of, hear this rustling around. I'm like, that sounds like a deer out there. And so I end up at that point in time thinking, wow, it sounds like it's getting closer. So I got my bow, it's, already on the ground, and I walk over to my bow, get my release back on, and get ready, because it sounds like this deer is going to come up out of the thicket, out in the open woods where I am. And then it sounds like, well, maybe it is getting further. And I look up, and here he is 100 yards away in an open part out in this thicket where I can see into it. So I'm kind of up on a hill. I can look down. I just see this giant rack. Just massive set of horns. And I'm like, there he is. He was bedded probably 60 to 80 yards from my stand this whole entire morning. He was laying down right there. I was so close to him. And I grabbed my grunt tube, give him a couple of grunts, hoping that he'll come back out towards where I am. And he takes a couple of steps towards me, stops, thinks about it, keeps on going the way he's going. I grunt again, stops, looks back towards me. And I do that 3 or 4 times. And then finally you can tell he's going to lose interest, and he keeps going. Well, I found exactly where he's bedded, and I don't think he had a clue what made that noise, and he may at this time assume it's another buck. And so then the next couple of days, so I was getting trail camera photos of him in that area. I ended up glassing with a set of binoculars down in that area and found where he was bedded. So I thought that once muzzleloader season started, because I'd be in better range than using a bow, that was when I could finally go ahead and get him, was opening day of muzzleloader.
Gotcha.
So I woke up super early, opening day of muzzleloader, snuck in on the backside of this bedding area to get set up somewhere else, and was in there hours and hours before it was going to get light out. And I come walking in, and this is when my heart sank, and I felt like I really just wanted to throw up all over myself, because I look, and there's actually a camper that had a fire going at this point in time. I don't know why. This is in an area, Jay, that I wouldn't expect anyone to ever set up and go camping. I still don't know why that they ended up doing this, but they're essentially in this thick area why you'd want to go in there, I have no idea. And there's somebody that has a fire going and music playing and a tent set up.
On opening day of muzzleloader. Awesome.
On opening day of muzzleloader, yeah. And wow. Here it is, probably 2 hours before it's even going to get light out. And I'm in there, because I wanted to get set up early. I wanted to sneak in, to the back side of the bedroom so I could, get set up, have everything calmed down before he comes back to his bed. And somebody foiled my plans. And my first reaction is that I'm just beside myself. And then I'm like, I can't even get mad at this guy, because he is, in a different way, that passionate about the outdoors, where he took it upon himself to want to go out camping on Halloween night.
Right.
And so I ended up coming up to him and talking, and, I pretty much said, you don't kind of realize, what you've done at this point in time. I was like, first, are you a hunter? And he had said, no, I'm not a hunter. And so I, said, hey, there's been a particular, buck that I've been after, and he just kind of ruined it. And he's kind of telling me, oh, he'll be back. And I'm like, no, you don't have at this time, the deer was 9.5 years old. So we had the teeth age, and he ended up being 10.5 years old.
Wow.
So that's where, at this point in time, a 9.5-year-old buck isn't going to be back after somebody had a fire and had music playing all night in his bedroom. It's
Right.
just not going to happen.
Right.
Yeah. So that's where my 2014 season is kind of, I knew it because that's where I knew he was going to be. And I thought I had him, I was confident. I was like, look, this is in a spot where, at this point in time, I'm the only person that's setting up. I'd seen him, multiple times. I knew exactly where he's bedded, and now he's going to disappear. And just like I thought, he completely disappeared off the radar and didn't come back to that area during 2014.
No kidding. Just like clockwork. Wow.
Yep. So pretty much that plan got torched.
Yep. But you're learning, like you're taking all the things that you knew about the whitetail and older bucks, and you're plugging it in. I think what it did is it sounds like it's keeping you from wasting time and getting focused on the next plan as soon as you possibly could.
Yep.
Gotcha. All right. So that ended the season.
Yep. That pretty much, even though, I kept hoping, he'd show back up on trail camera, in that area. I just pretty much knew that, once that had happened, he wasn't returning, to that particular bedding area. There'd been way too much, of a human intrusion there.
Gotcha.
So it was one of those that I pretty much, at that point in time, had to, for the most part, as much as I kept hunting and was hopeful and optimistic, I pretty much, in my heart of hearts knew that 2014, it was going to happen, but by, a chance of fate, everything ended up turning. And so it just wasn't going to happen that season. And so at this point in time, knowing that I've, now, been pursuing this, huge mature buck for 4 seasons, I'm questioning, if he's even going to make it, to a 5th. And
right.
So that's where I was really hopeful. But, once the 2014 season came to a close, I just had to sit there and wait the whole entire, rest of the year, watching just days and months turn off the calendar, before I could, get an opportunity, to go back out and start, really seeing, visual evidence of him with, trying to, get trail camera photos. And so
right.
That's where then luckily, in the summer of 2014, I didn't have to wait too long. In July, early July, that's when then I had, the camera evidence. I don't think I actually checked it till probably the end of July or sometime in August. And I had his picture where he was about a week in one particular area. I had, quite a few pictures of him. And not only had at this point in time, was he still out there? Not only still did he have a huge rack, he hadn't gone downhill. He had changed he started to go non-typical over the years, but he completely changed into this huge palmated just bloom of horns that went straight up, and particularly his left side completely just morphed into this crazy non-typical like bloom of horns.
And different than anything you'd seen on him before.
Yeah, in previous years, in 2011, 2012, it was more of a typical, framed rack. 2013, 2014, the biggest change is he had a flyer drop coming out of the back, where he had like this drop time that flew back and went down, which was really unique and really cool. In 2014, he started to have like more of a thicker kind of palmation, on that left side. But then in 2015, it just completely changed to where there were so many characteristics that were still the same, especially to where he had like a big nub coming out in front of one of his brow tines that now turned into what is bigger than a brow tine. I can't remember the exact inches on it, but it was like almost 13 inches of this huge spike that came up the front of his head, and then had like another point that came out like probably another 4 inches sticking out of it. So it completely changed his rack, but he had characteristics that you definitely knew, it had to be him.
What was it, do you think, that caused the change in his rack?
So this is where, looking back, I'd always wondered by some of the ways that he would, that he would move, through the woods, and the things that he would do, is that obviously with the hunting presence that was there, had he been injured, had he been hit? And I had heard rumors in 2013 of somebody that may have, there was a giant buck that he'd seen that, that he had shoulder hit with an arrow and never recovered. And that's where in 2013 he seemed to, kind of disappear as well around that time. So I wasn't sure if he'd been injured in a previous year, but looking back on it, when it came time to, to butcher the deer up and removing the hide, we did find that embedded at the base of his neck, in between the neck and the shoulder blade area, there was a piece of like a copper slug that had been found in the deer that had been there for quite some time. So that is one of those that, that could have led to it. And I still have pieces to this day, of the bullet that we had pulled, from this buck.
Wow. That's crazy. Wow. So the legend was true.
Yep. It was definitely. The only thing is I think back to that. I couldn't imagine being that guy.
No. What a bummer.
That's it. So this is a story that guy could probably tell,
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So where do we go next?
So with 2015, after getting pictures of him confirming he's still out there, he's still roaming the woods. It was one of those that he was in an area where I hadn't, necessarily spent as much time. And so I was assuming, okay, this is kind of, phase one where I theorized he was going to be. There was, some more, hard crop, feed that was over in that area, the hard mat stuff. And so I said, well, early season, that's probably where he's going to be. And so I was hunting him, over there, didn't see him, was seeing a lot of doe activity, but the pictures I was getting him was early in the morning. And then in September, I started to get more pictures of him, along the edges of this field, and that's where I was starting to see him in the kind of end of September there. And so it was good to just keep getting more pictures than I'd ever gotten of him, and seeing almost on a weekly basis, like camera evidence. He's still out there. This is what he's doing. Waiting in kind of for that time when hopefully he was going to move into the same area where I knew once pressure picked up in the woods, youth weekend came around, the gun hunters, the shots were going off that he would probably start ducking into. And actually a little ahead of schedule than what I expected. I was thinking I may have to wait more until muzzleloader season to start, even though I wanted to, get him with a bow. That's when then it was October 9th, 10th, and 12th, he moved back into that kind of bedding area where I'd focused my efforts before, and I had pictures of him showing up in that area. And so I can't remember exactly what day I checked the camera, but it was, probably around I'd say 14th or 15th is when I checked that camera. And not only was he down in that area again, but two of the times were during daylight that he was working the scrape that I'd put out, because that was something that I'd really put in my arsenal, was trying to, put out mock scrapes, to where this was a scrape that I'd started back in 2011 that was no longer a mock scrape. I didn't have to touch it or do anything. The deer had just taken it over, and they would use it year-round, actually. And so at that point in time, I was really excited, and I said, well, I'm taking a step back and kind of looking at this and saying, well, what mistakes have I made in previous seasons? Well, you've jumped right in, you've hunted, and so, well, he's going to be there. He's not going anywhere until, something changes. Hopefully, there's not going to be another camper that's going to come back and start another fire in his bedroom. Like that was a 1 in a trillion odds. So it's not going to happen again. So now let's look and wait for the right weather pattern. And so looking at the extended forecast, I saw a cold front coming in, and I knew that was going to be the best odds of him being still up on his feet, during daylight. And so there was the weekend coming up where the only time, for the most part, I got in pictures of him is when the temperatures had dropped into the 40s.
Okay.
And so knowing that the cold got him up on his feet and got him moving and staying up longer, and oftentimes during daylight, that's when, it was going to be the opportunity to hunt. And so that's when actually that weekend, my father, knowing that I had a really good feeling, and my gut said, if it's going to happen, this is probably going to be the weekend. And so he had driven down from Maine, to be there and be a part of the experience. And so we had hunted, a couple of areas around the fringes, some tinker stands, I guess, as I'll call them. And then finally that morning rolled around, Sunday, October 18th, and I got in, to that stand, really early. And that's when I'm set up, and it had that feeling. It was cold, it was crisp. And I said, I hope he's still out there roaming, and he's going to come back, to the scrape before he goes back to his bed site. And probably, I'd say 20 minutes after it got light out, I'm sitting there and I heard that snap that we all want to hear. The one that, it's not a squirrel, it's got to be a deer. That twig snap, that branch break, and it just, you don't guess. You just know it's a deer.
Right.
It's something's going to happen. And so when that branch broke, I'm looking towards the sound, and it's, thick in the area where I am. And I look up, and then all of a sudden, I see a body moving, and it's a big body. And then sure enough, there's the visual confirmation I needed, that giant set of horns. And It's him. And my heart starts to race, and the adrenaline starts to surge. But as soon as my heart started to race, and as soon as the adrenaline started to surge, I also had the kind of calm feeling overtake me, where it's like, this is finally going to happen. Like, he's here. The wind is blowing directly in my face. He is coming towards me, and he's doing just the classic J-hook right now. He's going to come down beyond the scrape. He's going to get downwind of it and J-hook it, and then go to work the scrape.
Yep.
And he's coming in, and he's walking down through. And as he comes down, I'm like, well, how far is he going to go before he J-hooks? That scrape is probably 30 yards out in front of me, and I'm set back off it. And he comes down about, I'd say 10 yards in beyond it, and he's still off to the right of where the scrape is. He comes down, he starts to J-hook, and he comes towards this little opening. This is probably like an old, like grown up, like, tote road or something like that, in front of me. And he gets towards, and he starts to hook. And that's when then I'm like, okay, he's going behind some trees. My bow is on a hanger. It's sitting right in front of me. And so, I mean, it's right there already, right at perfect level. I don't have to turn around. I don't have to reach it. I don't have to stand up. I can stay sitting down. And, I have my hand on the bow, get my release clipped in, and his head goes behind a tree, and it's time to draw. Like, this is finally going to happen. And as I go and draw, his head's behind like a tree right there. There's a little bush in front of it. And he steps out, and the rack's there, the head, the neck, the front shoulder, everything is out in the open now. He's probably about 20 to 25 yards away. I mean, right there, up close and personal. And I go to full draw, and he stops where I have about an inch behind that crease in that front shoulder. And I said, I have not waited this long to not have him take that last half a step to make sure that I do this deer justice, and I don't want to hit a shoulder bone. I want to make sure that, that I make a good hit on him.
Right.
And so I remember at this point in time being so calm and just, going through the memories of 5 years, all the time and effort, put into it, that I was like, you know what, I can just relax. And so I actually took the knock point, away from my face, kind of held it out the side. I'm at full draw still, the cam's sitting down on my knee in front of me. And he's looking, kind of back towards that scrape. So he's not looking towards me. The wind's blowing in my face. And so I know I got time. I just sit there at full draw for probably in reality what's probably over a minute, maybe even two. And I'm just sitting there holding and waiting. And luckily I have a bow that has amazing let off at this time. And so
right.
I know that I don't have to worry about it, jumping on me. And finally he takes that last half a step. He's still looking towards that scrape. And I said, all right, now it's time to do it. Line up everything. I went through that checklist, make sure the peeps lined up with the housing of the site, make sure, you got the string touching your nose. And I just went through that whole checklist saying, don't rush it. There's no need to rush. And put that pin a little further back probably than what I should have, because, again, I just didn't want to, get caught on the shoulder. I didn't want anything to go wrong. I said, I know that if I, get him back further enough, I'll be able to recover this deer. And so I ended up putting that pin mid-body behind the shoulder, let it fly. Saw the arrow go in. I, had a lighted knock. Knock's lit up. Confirm hit. He takes a couple of, stoopers going off towards the thick stuff, kind of bounding forward. He circles about 30 yards off to my side. The arrow's still in him. And this is part of why I went with a heavier arrow setup this year, to make sure this never happens again, that the knock is still sticking out. I can still see the arrow in him. And he stands about 30 yards off to my left in just thick cover, so there's no way I could, get another shot at him.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking he's gonna go over, like he's gonna go down. He's standing there at 30 yards, and I'm watching this happen. Now it's hitting me, like the emotions, coming in. I'm not quite as calm as I was before, and I'm like, it's a great hit. Like, go down. I'm like, I'm gonna watch him drop, and then he walks off.
Of course,
but still, at this point, yeah, of course, he walks off. It's been this long. Why would he not, walk off at this point in time? Right. So that's where, I go and I get down. I meet up with my father. And I said, look, I'm going to go back after wait a little bit, and I'm going to, follow the blood trail. So I went back in, and my father, he held back for a little bit. And so I went in, and I remember when I ended up walking in, there was good blood in the beginning. I went down to where the deer was, and, sure enough, I look up, and there he is, laying down, non-typical side sticking up. And I know I told the story to some of my buddies, like, I would have thrown my bow at this point in time and running towards the deer, like, seeing him down on the ground like that. And I'm looking, he doesn't look like his chest cavity's moving, doesn't look like he's breathing. And I'm like, all right, let me just, rustle a couple leaves here. I'm 40 yards away, all right, I think he's done. And all of a sudden, I take a couple more steps, and I'd gone and drawn when I saw him down. I let back down, and at this point in time, he jumps up to his feet. He takes a couple of bounds. Next thing you know, he's up in a bush, up on the knoll, looking back at me. the arrow's still in him, and I can see it's in a good spot. And I'm thinking, how is this still happening? Like, how did I just, jump this buck? Like, this can't even be happening right now.
Right.
But I remember him looking back at me and looking at him, and it was just one of those, that moment frozen in time where we're locking eyes, and it's just like, I'm looking at him being like, wow, this is one of the last things, that he's probably, ever going to see. And I wanted to give him like a glimpse of almost just respect and admiration. Like, it's like, I can't tell you, how much looking at you standing on that hill, it's like how much I owe you to that you made me a better hunter, and how much time and effort's gone into this. And,
right.
Being 10 and a half years old, like how much respect, I have for him. And so, there was nothing I could do. I couldn't draw. I couldn't get another arrow on him. I knew the best thing that I could do at that point in time was, pull out longer. And so, I pulled out, met up with my father, and then we waited, a few hours at that point in time, went back in, and then we started, the track at that point in time. And it was some thick stuff. And we looked around for a while to the point where my father had almost stepped on him at one point in time. And so I thought I heard something move. And so I kind of said something to my dad. And so he turned around. And then you're talking like another probably hour later, we get back to that spot. And I'm like, well, this is where we kind of had, last blood. He's got to be right here, but it's hard to follow blood. It's so thick. I mean, we're getting caught up in you name it, just, the thick, nasty raspberry bushes, whip trees. And it's just, it's thick. So
yep.
Finally at that point in time, I get to where, okay, he's got to be over here somewhere. He hasn't gone far. I mean, this isn't like we're tracking miles. We're talking, hundreds of yards. It's just so thick. And so
right.
Finally I get to the spot where I'm like, look, my dad was last here. There's like a little bank that kind of drops down. And he was standing here, but then he turned around and looked at me. And I get to that bank and I look down, and there he is. He's laying down. The rack is there. Like, I just see it. And at that point in time, my arms go up in the air. My dad turns around, just gives me a huge smile. And that's when it kind of, that sad feeling also, overtook me. I was super
right.
proud. I was super
right.
happy, but knowing that, that animal's not going to be out there, anymore, that somebody who's been almost like a friend to me for 5 seasons now, it was
right.
finally over. The story had ended. And probably one of the coolest things about it, knowing how much time I'd spent, with my father growing up, Jay, is that the first deer when I was 11 that I'd ever gone, and killed, it was a 4-pointer last day of hunting season, when I was 11 years old. And as we're bringing it out, it starts snowing the first time that year. And I don't know if you remember, back to last season on October 18th,
mm-hmm.
the first snow that we had was on October 18th last year. I don't know if you got that up where you were.
I don't recall it exactly, but I know we got a foot on October 31st. I think it was a couple years ago. This was just some spit and snow. But yeah, it was one of those that once we're finally we got them loaded up. I have a cart that I use, and we're dragging them out on the cart. And we finally got to the point where it's now easy going. We've gotten out of the thick stuff. We're on a trail, and we can head on out. I remember looking up and like, you've got to be kidding me! It's like a blue sky day. Wow, there's snow coming down. Like it's spitting snow, and it's October 18th. And like, well, what's going on now? It's like, and I'm like, Dad, remember the first deer, that I'd ever, gone and taken. Remember that when we got back out to the gravel pit, it started to snow. Right.
And it's doing the same thing again. It's like the best deer of my life, one that I'd put more time and effort into than anything. It's now doing the same thing. I got to share, that moment experience, with my dad too. And so that was a really, really cool moment at that point in time. It just seemed to, kind of put, the icing on the cake, if you will, to a great experience, and, just added to the memories.
That's awesome. What a great story. Unbelievable. Just fantastic, Neil. Wow.
That is a great story.
It really is.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, I hope, I told I'm sure I left out a lot of details because there's so much that goes into, to that long, of a hunt. And, I mean, the people that I met, I mean, the doors that I knocked on, the houses of, people who lived, in the neighborhoods, telling of the story of a deer that lived in plain sight to them, right? To the non-hunters, he was brash, he was bold, he eats plants in our yards, and, we've seen this huge buck for years.
Right.
And then to us as hunters, he was elusive, he was a ghost, and, he would be, not, he just wouldn't exist. And then, to finally, complete that, it was just amazing, and something that, if he hadn't been, a big body deer, if he hadn't been, as big of a rack, as he was, it was one of those that it wouldn't have mattered at that point in time if he had spikes on his head. It was just, I felt that I owed it to the deer to have, that memory, to have his story, go on, because for, a buck of that nature to live to 10 and a half years old in such a heavily hunted area, and survive, for that long. It's like, and to outsmart, all the other hunters, that had been after him. I mean, it's just, he was an amazing animal and probably one of the smartest deer that I've ever encountered.
That's awesome. Wow. Mind blowing. That was a great story and how you condensed it. I got to ask, and this, since you said it, it's been on, I have to ask this question. Tell me about your mock scrapes. What do you do? How do you say, something worked. So, and if deer are using this one scrape or the scrape that you made and they go to it every year, you must have done something special. So tell me about your mock scrapes, because I guarantee other people are thinking the same thing.
So I've used a lot of different stuff with mock scrapes. I've tried through a lot of different trial, error, different things, different approaches. So I guess to start off with a joke, I think the number one ingredient that goes into making a good mock scrape, for me at least, is using some Pendleton pea. Where so I've had friends and buddies, have asked me, like, what is your secret to mock scrapes? And I say, it's Pendleton pea. It's, right. I can start selling the stuff. I'll bottle it for you if you need me to, it's a renewable resource.
Right.
So, but honestly, with the mock scrape, something that's been, great success to me. I think I heard statistics once that, it's like with mock scrapes, bucks will visit them. It's like, only 19% of the time during daylight. Well, that's a 19%, odds in our favor that there's going to be a buck there versus not. And so I'll take a 1 in 5 chance over a 0% chance any day of the week. And so when I started using these mock scrapes, what I found is that, most mock scrapes have a licking branch. They're going to be, the primary ones, not just ones that are laying down, as they go. Like when we discussed, some of the pre-show stuff, tonight walking in, I found a lot of scrapes to a spot where I was checking some trail cameras, and those are probably just young bucks just going along, just digging up the ground and pawing it up, where, to me, a primary scrape needs to have a licking branch. And so I've tried whether it's, spraying scrape smells in it, whether it's using, buck urine, whether it's doe urine. I've tried a lot of it. And I think the biggest thing is probably that fresh dirt smell is one that they get a visual, they see the ground, that's been scraped up. There's a licking branch there, so it's just irresistible to come and, put their horns in it and start, getting some of that preorbital gland, up in that branch. Right. And then from there, for them to urinate in it, to put, their interdigital glands, down in that scrape, I think it just becomes something that they need to do. And then after, other deer have done it, they want to, keep doing in that same area. So it becomes, that answering machine, or that voicemail, in the woods for other deer. And so that's how I've gotten a lot of pictures on trail cameras by using mock scrapes. And so sometimes I'll just, whether it's with rubber boots or just grab a stick, and dig up the ground and make sure there's a branch there, which typically up here in the Northeast, it's hemlock, I think, is probably the preferred.
Yep.
That I've seen for licking branch that works really well. I've seen, oak trees work, but for me, it's if I find, a good hemlock branch that can overhang, that's going to be, probably the key to then digging up a spot and getting that fresh dirt on the ground. And for me, it works great because you have a spot where a deer is going to stop in close proximity to a stand. They're going to check that area out. Plus, if I'm going to, one thing that I found and heard, that deer can't tell the difference between human urine and deer urine. It just turns to an ammonia smell after so many minutes. And so that's where it's also great to be able to relieve yourself before you get in the stand. And so you have an area that you can do it that's in close proximity to the stand. And it's led a lot to, my success hunting in and around scrapes, and also just to get inventory and pictures, of different deer in the area.
Gotcha. All right. Very, very good. That's awesome. Such a great story. And thanks for sharing that detail on how you build your scrapes. I think I haven't done a lot of the mock scrapes, but I think I'm going to use more of them now. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah, and I just started this year. I've been tinkering around with using, I know there's a guy, Smokey. He makes, I think he's from, I can't remember if it's Virginia, maybe the hills of Virginia somewhere. There's a guy, Smokey, that he makes. It's a brand of scents, and he, I guess, grew up, as a trapper, I think, if I'm remembering the story correctly. And so as a trapper, their livelihood, you have to be good with scent. You can't have, a lot of human odor contaminating it, because you're trying to outsmart, predators. And so for him, he started to bottle preorbital gland that you can put on the licking branches, which one big thing that I've noticed on licking branches is that they almost like chew that branch. Have you ever seen that, Jay or Dusty, where they chew kind of the end of the branch and the bark's like removed?
Right. Yep. Definitely.
Well, what it does is when they put that orbital gland, I guess, on it, they're getting that scent on it. It absorbs better into a branch without the bark on it, which makes sense, right? That bark's that, that outer shell's preventing that scent from seeping into the wood. So that preorbital gland, which the stuff that I just started using this season, which I've seen it results. I actually have in one location, there's been 2 bucks that are, probably 2.5, year olds. Maybe one of them is a 3.5-year-old. Not super mature bucks yet, but the 2 times I put it out that evening, they came to the scrape and they actually fought in front of the camera. I have one series of videos. I probably have 20 or 30, 15-second video clips of them. They start off, just, kind of nuzzling each other, 2 young bucks. Then they kind of start, the little pushing match and shoving. Then they start actually, fighting in front of the camera. And it's definitely one of those that has seemed to work, that preorbital gland. It's that sense they can pick up on. And then when it's at, a scrape location, we'll just drive them nuts.
Gotcha. All right. Very, very good. Well, Neil, I think it's time for the 10 rapid fire question to get to know you a little bit better, if you're ready for them.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
Shoot.
Dusty, go for it.
Neil, first question. Best hunting tip of all times?
For me, probably the number one hunting tip that I could give anybody is put your time in. I think, for me, growing up is that, persistence, paid off, time in the stand, and that you learn a lot just being in the woods, whether you're sitting in a stand hunting or walking around. So it's just, put your time in. It's, I think, probably the number one thing. And, other than being out in the woods and putting time in, is just talking to other people and getting a chance to, learn from, other probably more accomplished hunters than yourself, because I know that was something that I tried to also do, growing up a little bit, was to surround myself, with other, really accomplished hunters.
Great tip. One thing that you feel lost without going into the woods?
I feel lost without. Well, other than obviously some of the obvious stuff, like, your weapon that you're going in with.
Right. You got a lucky charm or something that you can't go to the woods without.
So, yeah, obviously being a follower of this podcast, the lucky charm type thing is probably, for me, this may sound kind of weird. Obviously, I've heard some people share some weird stuff on this podcast, but for me, it's probably my grandfather's handkerchief, actually. Because for me, it's like one of those, you get in the woods on a cold morning, your nose runs, right? So it's one of those that I actually have, my grandfather, who, he's no longer with us now, but it was one of those that I remember I got given from my grandmother a bunch of his stuff, and one of the keepsakes was some of his handkerchiefs that he used to have growing up. And so it's one of those that, knowing that whenever I go in the woods, I like to have something to blow my nose on a cold day. I've always had one of those red handkerchiefs with me, and that's something that for me has always been a good luck charm that I keep with me, and it's just something that I always want to make sure I have when I go in the deer woods.
Gotcha. What's your biggest pet peeve?
Biggest pet peeve. Probably what most other hunters would say is probably, other hunters, I guess. Even though, I try to, have an understanding, for other hunters in, knowing that, especially when you're hunting, public ground, that they have just as much right to be there, as I do. But it's one of those, knowing that, the time and effort, that goes into sometimes scouting and finding a good area. We have other people, that show up or go through it. That's one of those frustrating things, I would call it, more than, necessarily a huge pet peeve, but other hunters, I guess.
Gotcha. How old are you today, Neil?
Today I'm 33.
33. So what would the 33-year-old Neil tell to the 20-year-old Neil, knowing what you know today?
Tell to the 20-year-old Neil. I would say probably the most important thing that you can do is just to, try to, really, learn as much as possible, continue, to follow your dreams, your aspirations, and, I guess just, I don't know, I guess try to, really learn as much as possible and, experience all the things that are out there, because, looking back, and one thing you don't want to do is regret, things in life. And I think we all, have regrets. And so trying to live life to the fullest and really make sure that you can, learn and take in as much experience as possible is probably one of the biggest things. And so something that I think that I've done, but there's certain things, looking back that, you want to make sure that you always make, the right decisions and do the right things. So that's probably, the only advice that I could give. And, from a hunting standpoint, I would say just, hunt smarter and not always harder is probably the thing that I tell the 20-year-old Neil.
Right on. You meet a stranger at a convention, a hunting convention, or In the elevator, they ask, "What do you do for a living?" What do you say?
I would say that I am a health fitness manager, and I run an all women's gym. It's personal training and nutrition. So I would say I'm a fitness manager.
Gotcha. What'd you have for breakfast, Neil?
This morning I had 3 eggs over easy with 2 pieces of Vermont maple syrup flavored sausage, just some small links. I put a little bit of salsa on the eggs and some cut up avocado.
Very nice. I may have to have
the one
breakfast.
thing what was that, Dusty?
I said I may have to get up and come eat breakfast for you tomorrow. Sounds like a good breakfast.
Mm.
Yeah, I always try to have my protein in the morning. So, usually it's, having eggs is pretty much a main staple. And so when I get time to cook a good quality breakfast, that's usually what I'm frying up. But if I'm in a pinch, the one thing I have a lot of mornings, hunting, which, don't tell any of the clients, at the gym that I run, but I'll have like a Jimmy Dean breakfast bowl sometimes, which, has your, I typically go with meat lovers. So your bacon, your sausage, your eggs, your potatoes and stuff, all in there. Because you can slap it in the microwave, and 3 minutes later you got, a nice kind of hearty, hot breakfast that, all you do is microwave, scarf it down before you hop in the truck and head out in the woods.
Right on.
Very cool.
You get your own billboard, a blank canvas. What would it say?
That one's a tough one. I put some time into thinking about that. And I'm really not sure. I don't really know as far as what I'd put out there, for a billboard. I can't really answer that one. I've tried to come up with a good answer for you on that one, Dusty, knowing that you'd probably ask it, but I don't have anything necessarily to put on a billboard.
Nothing, huh? Nothing at all?
How about a hashtag?
No, I can't really, think of that. I don't know if I'd really want to display necessarily anything, and put out there. I guess I don't need to necessarily, broadcast or really say any message, at this point in time. So, as far as a billboard, no, I guess I can't think of anything. Sorry to let you down on that one.
Oh, man, that could be a first, Jay.
I think that's the first. I'm going to make one for you that just says, be humble. I think that we'll leave it at that.
Well, and that's one that I've tried to work on, my life is, especially, it's one of those that, growing up, I've always been, confident, playing sports growing up. And so I've tried to learn to be more humble and, really seeing that, people that I admire, in my life that are humble. And, it's one of those that I think it also leads to a lot more things in life. You can be humble and, you don't necessarily have to talk about, your accomplishments as much. You can, let others recognize it for you.
Fair enough.
Sense.
Yep.
I say the word successful. Who's the first person that pops in your mind and why?
For me, I don't know. It's a hard. That's again, it's a hard one to answer. But for me, when I think of successful, it's kind of a weird way to word it in. But my mom, comes to mind is because my mom, she's had the aspiration in life that she wanted to raise her 2 kids, and provide everything she could to give them a good life and to have them be happy. And so my mom, I think she's done just that. Is that I love my mom a lot, and she's done a lot for me. And so it's one of those that if her goal in life was to to raise her son that could be happy and enjoyed life, she's done just that. So even though it's not like as far as with my mother, it's not like she's had a lot of, I guess, personal success. Her success was putting it into her kid. And so that's what she wanted out of life, and she's done just that. And so she raised, a happy boy who's gone up to do things that he loves. So I would say my mother.
Very cool.
Yeah, very cool. What's the day in your life look like, Neil?
Well, it depends. Are we talking work days or are we talking hunting days?
We're talking just the everyday life.
So everyday life would probably start depending on what my schedule at work is going to be like. I'll wake up. I'll have, my typical variation of eggs in the morning for breakfast. Then from there, I'll sit down, have my cup of coffee, maybe get caught up on Sports Center. Or now I've started to, over the last, year and a half, listen to a podcast is pretty much how I start my day. Hop in the truck, continue that podcast as I'm driving into work. This morning I was catching up on, last week's episode of the Big Buck Registry, and I still have to, get through part of that, my ride into work today. And then once I get to work, I'm pretty much, talking health and fitness and, motivating the clients at the gym to, really, figure out where they're at, and I also do personal training. So I'll be taking clients, through workouts, sitting down, talking nutrition, just having, motivational talks. And, then from there, get a chance to head home, come back, spend time in the evenings, with, my girlfriend, my dog, and, then get a chance to, go to bed and do it all over again.
What time do you usually get up, Neil?
That varies. If I'm having to go in early, because our sessions start at work at 6 o'clock, so I mean I'll be up at 4:30 or 5. If I don't have to go in till later, I'm usually up anywhere between 6 and 8 o'clock. I try to get as close to 8 hours of sleep as I can every night. So I do, for 9 months out of the year, I do really well, I think, with getting my 8 hours of sleep. But then when it comes deer season, that's when I probably average, I'd say closer to 5 hours a night. Because I burn the candle on both ends and make sure if I'm not working, I'm out in the woods hunting, and so that's where it's a lot of nights without much sleep.
Gotcha.
Right. Makes sense though. What's a hunting day in Neil's life look like?
So a hunting day in the life of Neil would vary whether I'm hunting in New Hampshire or in Maine, but typically it's going to consist of waking up really early. I've been one that I always try to get out in the woods as soon as possible, whether it's, half an hour to, heck, I've been out in the woods as early as, 2 to 3 hours before it gets light out, depending on where I'm hunting. So I get up, eat breakfast, get showered. I go through my regimen of showering right before, I take off and leave after I've eaten breakfast, drink my coffee. So I want to make sure I'm trying to, eliminate as much scent as possible. Hop in the shower, use the scent-free sprays. Then from there, the scent-free soaps after I've taken, my shower. Then I'll head down to like a little hunting room that I have, which I have a closet that I use, a device that produces ozone, similar to, I'm looking forward to, getting the scent lock enforcer. I've talked with, Tim Guthrie about that as well. Because I use a similar product now in a closet, like a garment closet, that you can hang clothes in.
Yep.
And so I'll take my my hunting clothes out of that I hung, in there for the evening. So I've tried to eliminate all the scent off those. I have a tote box that I'll then take my clothes out, put them, in the tote box, grab my bow, grab my tote box, if I can grab a tree stand, pair of boots, head out to the truck, throw them on the back bed of the truck typically, and then from there hop in and drive to where I'm hunting and then get changed, typically ride over in shorts and a t-shirt, and a pair of flip-flops to where I go hunting, and then I'll change into all my hunting clothes right there at the spot, and get ready to head on into the woods.
Very nice. All right. Sounds like you've got a regimen that you follow. It's nice.
Yeah. Yep. So I try to eliminate as much scent as possible, and that's where using ozone. I think for me, made a big success last year. Seeing more deer, just treating my clothes, overnight, turning them inside and out. Trying to make sure that those O3 molecules are binding with any human scent. And I just wanted to try to step my game up. And I was washing my clothes. I'd only try to wear them once before I re-washed them. Our washing machine, in our house, luckily I have, my girlfriend and I have a roommate who are great that, not only during the hunting season, but before the season now, we run, unscented laundry detergent through that almost year round now. So that way, not only during the season will I use, the scent eliminating soaps, right, but almost year round, we try to use the dye and perfume free, laundry detergents. So,
excellent. I think that helps.
Yep.
I think that helps.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Very
well,
good.
Neil, that wraps up the 10 rapid fire questions with some great answers you give to us there. And it's always a special part of the show that Jay and myself really thoroughly enjoy. And we hope you enjoyed answering them, and we hope the listeners enjoy hearing your answers.
Yeah, well, I did enjoy answering them. I hope the listeners enjoyed them. And sorry I couldn't answer a couple of them there for you. But, yeah, I tried to think long and hard about the billboard one, but just couldn't come up with something. So I hope I answered the rest of them, as well as I could.
Absolutely.
Very
nice.
Good. Great.
Yep. Neil, this has been an honor and a pleasure, and I thoroughly enjoyed listening to your deer story. And was it 1,490 days or something crazy like that?
Yep.
that this took. Did you actually? And I don't know if you name bucks, and I'm not really into it necessarily, but what did you end up like putting a name on this deer after you finally got it done?
So yes and no on that one. Where over the years, it was one of those that I just pretty much called him, Plan A or Big Boy. It was one of those that he had, different names just related to, being a big buck. And so, number one on the hit list. And then there was a name that did, kind of stick. It was actually after, it was another odd story, over the years. There's just another one of those ironic ones that got left out. But that hunter that I had met that one day who had the shed from a previous season, when I stopped at his house that day to go ahead and end up, seeing the shed, he had taken down my email, and he said there was one other, person in particular that seemed to be, pursuing this buck to the same level that I was. And so it was actually something you had on the show back, I don't know how many episodes ago, but Johnny Parker Brown.
Right. Yeah, Johnny Brown. Sure.
Yep, Johnny Brown. So he ended up emailing me in August of 2014, I believe it was, and said, something to the extent of, here we may be after the same buck. And at that point in time, we exchanged emails, and come to find out that he had a name that he had, kind of adopted to the deer, because somebody had asked him, once about, this buck that he was after. And so he wanted to come up with a name that was kind of adequate to the stature of it, but didn't really allude to what it was. And so, of course, every hunter's dream is a Boone and Crockett buck, right?
Right.
So he came up with the name Daniel for the buck, for Daniel Boone, for Boone and Crockett buck, Daniel Boone. So this name Daniel, which Johnny had come up with when we had conversations about knowing that we were, both hunting him, that's a name that, that we'd both, to be able to reference him would call. And so it's kind of something, between us and between other, kind of close hunting friends would use that name, Daniel. But for the most part, I had never really, had a name attached. So I've had a hard time, trying to name some of the deer that I've gone after, where now my girlfriend, she loves coming up with names. So she's the one, assigned to naming all the deer, they get pictures of the good bucks that, maybe a wall hanger according to her. So
gotcha.
So
cool.
Whether Plan A, Big Boy, or Daniel. Yeah.
All right. So Daniel the buck. Very nice.
Yep.
And Neil, this has been great. And thank you so much for joining us on the show. It was an absolute pleasure. And hopefully you'll have another story to tell in the near future. And you're always welcome back.
Yeah, I really hope, it's one of those that I feel like I've had, fortunate hunting career. And after, pursuing this buck, for as long as I did, it's going to be hard to top this one. I mean, we were talking, buck that, not only was 10 and a half years old, Jay, but, I had, the total gross score was, 192 inches. He had 22 points, dressed at 237 pounds. It's, it's going to be tough to beat that one, but I just, love the adventure of going after him and trying to target, and patting those big bucks. So, again, it's been an honor, to be on the show. And, this is truly, the deer of my lifetime. It's, it's been an honor talking to you guys about it and sharing the stories. And hopefully, all the listeners out there, loved hearing the story as well. And hopefully they get a chance, to really hunt and pursue, that buck of their lifetime, because it's something that I hope every hunter gets the chance to experience. To have that excitement going into the deer woods every day, every season, just knowing that he still could be out there. And it's just, it's just an experience that I hope everyone really gets to partake in.
That was great. It's always nice to hear how somebody from New Hampshire is routinely killing big deer. And Neil, I don't think he's pretty humble, so I don't think he really thinks about how good a hunter he is. But as we have built this contingent, this Facebook following, this tribe of diehard deer hunting fans, we pay attention to those who send in the most big bucks. And when we see that, that's when we strike. That's when we want to know, what the heck are they doing?
Right. Being as consistent as Neil has in New Hampshire, that speaks volumes. I've been there, I've done that, and it's no easy task to let alone shoot a deer, see a deer, or even hear a deer run off in New Hampshire. Is pretty unlikely.
Right. Yeah. Even if you jump them, it's pretty unlikely. But Neil seems to have no problem interacting with deer. He's like Mr. Deer of New Hampshire. So
he could be the New Hampshire deer whisperer.
I think we shall call him that from now on. Thanks to Neil for joining us on the Big Buck Podcast and telling us about how he does it and sharing it with you so you can do it too. Well, Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tines tip of the week this week?
We do, Jay.
The Chubby Tines tip of the week is sponsored by Morse's Sporting Goods. Firearms, used firearms, bows, used bows, located at 85 Kentucky Falls Road in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Give Jim a call at 603-464-3444, morsessportinggoods.com. Your dollars go further in New Hampshire. There's no sales tax. Morse's Sporting Goods.
It comes down to your landowners. They're taking care of you and by allowing you to hunt their land. Take care of them. The holidays are upon us, and if you can't do it, Thanksgiving's past here by Saturday of the show. But think about Christmas. Just a simple little fruit basket goes a long way with your landowners.
There you go. That's a great idea. Very, very nice. it's that time of year to give back to some of the landowners that generously let you hunt on them. And it's kind of hard for us to do that in New Hampshire because there's so much vast land and the land use rights are a little different, but there are still posted pieces of property that we get permission to hunt on. And that's when you wanted to go say thank you. So there's nothing that you could do as a hunter, I don't think, if you hunt on private land and you need to, that helps that relationship continue.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks to Scentlock and Forester for sponsoring the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. Thanks to the Eurohanger for also sponsoring the show. And thank you to Morsa Sporting Goods for sponsoring the Chubby Tines Tip of the Week. Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out in Big Buck Studios?
Oh, right now you can find me in Ohio ground blind here in the big woods of Ohio looking for a giant buck. But if you don't know where that's at, you can shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. Look me on Facebook, Chubby Tines Outdoors, or send me a follow request at Chasing Antler on Instagram. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Best place, I'll be deep in the New Hampshire deer woods looking for a track as the snow flies, but would like to kind of pin me down and ask me a question or make a suggestion or whatever, send me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/BigBuckRegistry. You can check us out on Twitter and Instagram, same thing, twitter.com/BigBuckRegistry, instagram.com/BigBuckRegistry. We're on YouTube, which is youtube.com/BigBuckRegistry. You can listen to the show, not just on iTunes, but you can listen to it on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google+, Blueberry, and every single show we do is produced as a video on YouTube, where you can listen to the audio as a video over there as well. And last but not least, if you have a couple dollars and you can spare it and you enjoy the content that we bring you on the show, we could always use more support. We could use your support to keep the show going. We have expenses. Yes, we have some sponsors, but there are other expenses that we need to pay for. We do want to bring you more rich content. That means we have to get out of the studios and go shake some hands, meet some people, and set up these interviews so we can bring them to you. And in order to do that, there's money involved. There's travel costs. We don't have a huge budget, but we definitely need that money to offset our costs so we can keep doing this. And if you'd like to become a patron, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/pledge. And I'll bring you to our Patreon page, and all the details will be right there for you. If you would like to share your big buck, go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all the instructions will be right there on how to get your buck featured on our Facebook page. Dusty, I think that's everywhere we are at.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay.
Well, I think it's time to sign off. Unfortunately, we have to go, but the good news is we'll be back next week. I'm Jay Scott.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Can't wait.